You know the feeling when a show starts with previously and your thumb is already on the remote because you just want the answer? That is where I want to begin. Not with an ancient title, not with reverence, with impatience.
And with the open book refusing that impatience.
Annoyingly, yes. The book is open to a story where a city is desperate, and I want to skip to the secret. The play makes me sit with the people who need the secret because they are suffering.
So before names, here is the plain setup. This is an ancient Greek play by a writer named Sophocles. Its central figure is Oedipus, the king inside the play. He governs a city called Thebes.
Pause on king, because we are not starting with crown and throne pageantry. He is the public person people expect to act when ordinary life breaks down.
Thebes has broken down. People come to the palace as suppliants, meaning they approach in a formal posture of need, praying at sacred places and asking the ruler for help.
The city is not suffering in an abstract, bad vibes way. There is plague, which here means deadly sickness spreading through the community. Crops are failing. Pregnancies are not coming safely to birth. The future of the city is physically thinning out.
I almost want to say, this is fate arriving. But that is too fast.
Thank you for catching yourself before the thunder machine rolled in.
The better first point is that Oedipus has already responded. He has promised to discover the cause of the suffering, and he has sent Creon to Delphi. Creon is a leading man connected to the royal house, and Delphi is a sacred place where Greeks went to ask for an oracle.
Let's define oracle before it becomes wallpaper. An oracle is a message believed to come from a god through a sacred site or speaker. It can tell people what has happened, what must be done, or what will happen. A prophecy is that kind of divine message about future or hidden events.
Creon comes back with the oracle's answer. Thebes must drive out a pollution. Pollution here does not mean litter or dirty water. It means a dangerous stain on the community, moral and sacred at once. Something that makes shared life unsafe until it is dealt with.
And the pollution has a cause. The former king, Laius, was murdered. The killer has not been found. The city must discover that murderer and answer the crime with exile or death.
Now the plague becomes a public case. Not a modern detective case with one clever person in a quiet room. A whole city has to move from suffering to knowledge.
This is where my skip recap habit really fails. I want the name of the killer. Sophocles is interested in the process that makes a name possible. Who speaks? Who slaves silent? Who is protected? Who is cut off? This is YY. Welcome to Critical Animal, where Bear asks the questions that make dinner parties uncomfortable, and I try to answer them.
Oedipus turns the oracle into a proclamation. A proclamation is a public announcement with force behind it. He says that anyone who knows the murderer should speak. He promises protection to the person who gives information.
That promise matters. It means testimony or public witness is being invited. Someone may know something dangerous. Oedipus gives that person a path to speak without being destroyed for speaking.
But he also marks silence as dangerous. Anyone who shelters the murderer or refuses to help is to be excluded from shared civic and religious life. No welcome in houses, no joining in prayers or sacrifices, no normal place in the community.
Stay with that. Civic means belonging to the city's shared life. Religious means the prayers, rituals, and sacred customs through which the city understands itself. Oedipus's words redraw both at once.
So his speech is not decoration.
No, it is not a king making a dramatic noise while the real plot waits off stage. His public words become part of the action. They organize cooperation. They define betrayal. They turn private knowledge into something the city can demand.
The curse he speaks against the unknown killer also reaches further than he understands.
Careful. That is true, but if we rush to the irony, we skip the opening again.
Let me revise. First, the curse works as procedure. It tells the city how to treat the hidden criminal and anyone who protects him. It gives the investigation teeth.
And later, when Oedipus realizes what his own words have done, he can say, "And this curse, was laid on me by no other mouth than my own."
That line hurts because he first speaks as a ruler, not as a man confessing. He thinks he is acting against another person's crime. His office makes the words effective before his knowledge catches up with them.
The play's trap is not that public action is fake. It is that public action works. The proclamation gathers speech, pressure, memory, fear, and evidence. The city begins to produce the truth Oedipus demanded.
Evidence is distributed. That means no single person holds the whole answer at the start. Different people carry pieces. A prophet who speaks painfully, family stories, messengers, servants, memories of old violence.
A prophet is someone believed to speak with divine insight. In this play, such speech does not arrive as a neat answer everyone calmly accepts. It enters a political crisis, so Oedipus can hear accusation as attack.
We also need one theater word before later episodes make sense. Chorus. In this kind of play, a chorus is a group of performers who speak or sing together. They are not just background music. They help voice the fear, prayer, and judgment of the community.
And tragedy, for our purposes, is not just a sad story. It is a serious drama where human action, suffering, and discovery are bound together. People learn, but the learning costs them.
That brings us to the later vocabulary, but only as a preview. Much later, Aristotle, a Greek thinker who wrote about how plays work, will use terms like action, plot, recognition, and reversal.
Translate those before we admire them. Action means the meaningful doing of the play. Plot means how those doings are arranged. Recognition means a moment of coming to know. Reversal means a turn where the situation flips into its opposite.
Those words will help us describe the machine, but they should not replace the opening crisis. Before theory, there is a sick city, a king trying to help, an oracle demanding justice, and a public speech that changes what everyone owes everyone else.
My first impulse was to ask, who did it? The play makes that question larger and more uncomfortable.
My first impulse was to make everything sound grand. The scene is grand, but its grandeur comes from practical pressure. Bodies are dying, crops fail, children are not safely born, and speech must become action.
So carry this question forward. What happens when a leader's effort to save a city makes him part of the danger?
The next public form is comedy, staged at major Dionysian festivals whose religious celebrations and competitions gathered public audiences. Performance could become public memory there.
A play could make a recognizable person into a public object. Aristophanes' Clouds put Socrates on stage, while Socrates is actually alive in Athens. Not Plato's Socrates, not a neutral report, but a comic figure built for theatrical action.
The comic compression is severe. Strepsiades is buried in debt because his son loves expensive horses. He goes to the Thinking Institute because he wants to learn how to defeat creditors with the weaker argument.
That premise is magnificent because it refuses innocence. The father is not seeking truth. He wants verbal technology to escape bills. Comic education begins as financial panic wearing intellectual clothes.
The students are strange, pale, and shoeless, and the Socrates figure is associated with absurd investigations, measuring a flea's jump with wax slippers, studying the acoustics of a gnat's intestines.
The gnat intestines detail is the kind of joke that looks stupid until it starts organizing a city's anxiety. Tiny natural inquiry, courtroom manipulation, debt, impiety, and disobedient youth all get tied to one ridiculous body.
That ridicule can wound. A stage version can outlive the event that produced it.
It can, and Plato's Apology makes that painfully clear. Socrates tells the jury that old accusations have trained them since childhood to imagine someone who studies things in the air and makes the weaker argument stronger. He explicitly refers to a writer of comedies.
The trial speech has to answer an atmosphere, not just charges.
That is the phrase. Comedy has already made a public type. The apology is not merely a transcript-like defense. It is a philosophical trial speech trying to separate a life of questioning from a cartoon the city remembers.
The comedy makes a durable public image, and Plato has to answer it from inside a court.
Clouds is not biography, but it is intelligent about fear. The city worries that speech might detach success from justice, and comedy makes that worry laughable, memorable, and socially shareable.
Old comedy uses topical names, bodily exaggeration, choral fantasy, and direct address to form public recognition. The spectators know debt, courts, fathers, sons, and clever speech.
Plato's dialogues enter this contested field with different instruments. Gorgias asks what rhetoric gives a speaker and audience. It places speech-making next to medicine, cooking, justice, and flattery.
The question becomes whether moving an audience is success if the speaker loses contact with justice. Persuasion is not morally empty because it builds something inside the hearer.
Phaedrus pushes the issue into composition. Socrates and Phaedrus examine speeches on love, and the dialogue asks, what kind of knowledge lets someone address different kinds of souls?
The handbooks are not enough there. A genuine art of speech requires knowing the subject, knowing the soul addressed, and arranging speech with the coherence of a living body.
That is Plato making form ethical. Arrangement is not packaging afterthought. The shape of speech affects desire, judgment, and what the listener becomes capable of seeing.
Then the Relf asks how poetic imitation forms habits, pleasures, griefs, and civic judgment. It is not a modern discipline feud between philosophy and literature.
It is a contest among public forms. Comedy makes Socrates a laughable social danger. The apology makes him a defendant answering inherited memory. Gorgias and Phaedrus turn persuasion into an ethical and intellectual problem. Republic asks what imitation trains a city to enjoy.
Aristotle inherits that dense field. His Poetics studies imitation by media, objects, and modes. His Rhetoric studies persuasion. He is not entering a clean department called literary criticism.
Nor is he simply handing out rules for writers. He is trying to understand how made forms shape public learning, judgment, and feeling. He comes after comedy has shown how powerful a stage image can be.
The comic Socrates, then, is not the historical Socrates, and not Plato's philosophical Socrates. He is a stage figure that became part of public memory.
And Plato's Socrates has to walk into court with that figure already in the room. That is the important genealogy. Not comedy lies, philosophy corrects, but forms competing over how a city remembers and judges.
Comedy can wound, and it also reveals what a community is ready to fear.
And philosophy can clarify, but it also has to fight for attention in a world already trained by performance. Public memory is not a neutral architecture. It has rhythm, jokes, stock images, and old accusations.
Aristotle's later vocabulary will be analytic, but it belongs to that world of shared audiences and public formation.
Keep the forms distinct. Comedy gives a crowd a figure to laugh at and carry away. A jury converts public reputation into a decision about a life. Dialogue asks people to test a claim by following questions, failures, and revisions. Each produces a different kind of attention.
And each makes something available while leaving something out. A comic type can carry an anxiety farther than an argument. A verdict must decide before every ambiguity is settled. Dialogue can slow judgment while still training its readers to value certain kinds of answer.
Aristotle enters after those experiments in public attention. His question is not simply what a play says. It is how a made action brings an audience to see relation, consequence, and change.
Which means our own remote habit is not alien to the ancient question. Audiences are always being trained by forms. We just have shinier buttons and less patience. The same figure can become a comic problem, a civic defendant, and a conversational provocation. Each form trains a different public habit.
Laughter gathers recognition and suspicion. A jury weighs speech under civic pressure. Dialogue asks listeners to stay with distinctions that resist a quick verdict. Aristotle's tragedy asks a spectator to follow an action whose consequences change the meaning of what came before.
That is the forward hinge. Aristotle does not choose serious philosophy over unserious theater. He asks what a made form lets an audience learn through pleasure, pattern, and judgment.
Whenever Poetics enters the room, people start reaching for formulas. Plot, recognition, reversal, catharsis, spectacle. Suddenly, Oedipus becomes a worksheet with blood on it.
Aristotle does define tragedy as an imitation of action, and he gives plot structural priority. Plot is the arrangement of events that makes the action a whole.
I know, and I can feel the rulebook forming in my hands as you say it.
That is the danger. But the treatise does not begin as a rulebook. It begins by asking how kinds of imitation differ: media, objects, and modes. Epic, tragedy, comedy, music played on pipes.
Classification sounds dry until you realize he is asking what relationship each form creates between representation and human action. The issue is not follow this recipe. It is what sort of thing is being made knowable.
In tragedy, what is made knowable is action. Character, thought, diction, song, and spectacle matter, but plot has priority because tragedy represents people doing and undergoing things.
Aristotle calls plot structure the first principle and, so to speak, the soul of tragedy. The formulation interrupts our habit of treating plays as personality machines, but it can also make people think structure floats above pain.
Aristotle's point is not that pain vanishes into architecture. He insists that a unified action is not everything that happened to one person. It is a sequence related through probability or necessity.
That distinction changes how we retell Oedipus. A king learns a terrible secret and blinds himself, gives us an incident. The action begins earlier. A city suffers. Its ruler makes a public promise. Witnesses are summoned. Each speech changes what the next person can say, and the inquiry turns back upon the person conducting it.
Character still matters, but character works inside that chain. Oedipus's confidence, anger, intelligence, and urgency make consequences possible because they meet prophecy, testimony, kinship, and civic office in a particular order.
That phrase helps if we keep it close to Oedipus. The plague leads to supplication. Creon brings the Delphic command. Oedipus proclaims the search. Tiresias resists. Jocasta speaks. The messenger arrives. The herdsman is forced to answer.
Probability does not mean that every turn is predictable beforehand. It means that once the action unfolds, the relations become intelligible. Necessity names the force those relations acquire.
That distinction saves us from spoilers pretending to be insight. The audience may feel the pattern tightening without knowing every piece. The action is not obvious. It becomes coherent under pressure.
Aristotle defines reversal as a change into the opposite of what was intended or expected, arising from the structure of the action. Recognition is a change from ignorance to knowledge, with consequences for those marked by fortune or misfortune.
Oedipus is the great demonstration, because reassurance keeps turning into evidence. Jocasta tries to calm him by saying, prophecies failed. The messenger tries to free him from fear about Polybus. Those gestures produce the opposite of comfort.
The recognition arises from the events themselves, rather than from an arbitrary device. The action has planted the conditions of discovery inside prior speech and memory.
This is where I have to revise my anti-rulebook reflex. Aristotle is not wrong to give us terms. The terms make relations visible, especially the difference between chronology and consequence.
Chronology says one thing happens after another. Plot, in Aristotle's sense, asks how one event changes the meaning and force of another.
And the historian-poet distinction belongs there. Aristotle says the historian speaks of what happened, while the poet speaks of what could happen according to probability or necessity.
That does not make poetry fake history. It makes poetry a way of grasping intelligible relations in action.
Oedipus is not important because it gives us fate as a theme in a box. It matters because a public demand for justice, a household secret, a road encounter, and a city's illness become one action.
Sophocles merges oracle, pollution, kinship, and human inquiry without reducing them to one simple explanation. Aristotle helps us follow the humanly visible route through which the action becomes known.
The phrase humanly visible is useful, as long as we do not pretend it excludes the sacred world of the play. Delphi is not window dressing. Pollutants is not metaphor only.
Aristotle's vocabulary attends to arrangement, but the play's world supplies the force of what is arranged. Religious command, civic office, marriage, birth, exposure, blood.
Spectacle is another place where we need care. Aristotle includes spectacle among the parts of tragedy, but calls it least intrinsic to the poet's art. The emotional force should arise from the arrangement of incidents, even when read.
That could sound like stage bodies do not matter.
Which would be absurd in Oedipus. Jocasta's death and Oedipus's blinding happen off stage, but the cries, reports, doors, blood, and aftermath make the knowledge bodily.
The spectacle is not the deepest formal cause, yet it gives theatrical presence to what the arrangement has made terrible. The image matters because the action has prepared it.
So we should not use Aristotle to demote performance into decoration. We use him to ask which parts of the suffering belong to construction, which to staging, and how they reinforce each other.
The pleasure of imitation also matters. Aristotle says human beings take pleasure in learning through likeness, even when the thing represented would be painful to see directly.
That is not therapy with marble columns. It is a claim about recognition, inference, and learning. The audience experiences pain and understanding together, not because suffering is pleasant by itself, but because form makes action thinkable.
Plato worries that imitation shapes the soul's habits and pleasures in dangerous ways. Aristotle shifts the defense toward construction, learning, and intelligibility.
They are not fighting over whether art is powerful. They agree on the power. They disagree over how that power should be judged and trusted.
There is also a civic dimension in Aristotle's Politics. He suggests that the many, taken together, may judge certain works better than a single excellent person, because different people judge different parts and together judge the whole.
That interrupts the image of the lone philosopher grading passive spectators. Public judgment can be partial, distributed, and still real.
The chorus in Oedipus is not the same as Aristotle's political claim, but it resonates with it. The chorus prays, hesitates, interprets, fears, and mourns as a civic body inside the drama.
Aristotle's political sketch begins from partial vision. One person notices a damaged part. Another catches a relation that has escaped the first. A whole can become more legible when those partial judgments meet.
Which is harder than saying, the crowd knows best. It asks people to bring a real piece of attention, then allow that piece to be changed by other people's evidence.
That is why a good discussion of a scene feels different from voting on whether a character is likable. One person may stay with the curse, another with Jocasta's fear, another with the old herdsman's refusal to speak. The action becomes larger because nobody's first grip is enough.
Their chorus makes that collective pressure visible inside the drama. It never knows enough to solve the case. It registers how the city's fear changes as each explanation changes its hold on the action.
I like resonates because we are not making a direct equation. The chorus shows collective judgment under strain. They cannot solve the case, but they carry dread while the evidence changes shape.
Then, Poetics gives us a partial vocabulary of attention. Action, arrangement, probability, necessity, reversal, recognition, spectacle, learning.
Partial is the key revision from you, and attention is the key revision from me. I came in allergic to formulas. I can now admit that terms can slow us down if we use them properly.
They help us not skip from plague to twist.
They help us see why the twist is not a twist. It is the action arriving at knowledge through the relations it has been building from the first public curse.
Tragedy seems so visual that I keep wanting to locate its force in what the audience sees. Bodies, masks, gestures, spectacle.
Spectacle matters, but a purely visual account misses how Oedipus teaches through what is not shown. The death inside the house and the blinding are reported before their consequences are displayed. That delay matters. We first receive an account, not an image. We have to imagine action through language, sequence, and relation.
Then the unseen event is still part of imitation.
Strongly so. Imitation is not limited to visible copying. A messenger's report can imitate an action by ordering causes, choices, shocks, and consequences. The audience learns by grasping how one thing followed another, why the unbearable act belongs to the completed pattern, and why merely seeing the wound would not explain it.
But when Oedipus returns blinded, spectacle becomes unavoidable.
It becomes consequence rather than mere display. The visible body arrives after narrative understanding has already been activated. We do not look at suffering as an isolated image. We see a body that is passed through recognition, household collapse, ritual pollution, and public exposure. The sight is heavy because the plot has taught us how to read it.
That helps with Aristotle's idea that painful representations can still involve learning and pleasure.
The pleasure is not cheerfulness. It is the severe satisfaction of apprehending form, seeing that the representation has made intelligible what would otherwise be chaos. Painful things can be represented in ways that disclose relation, dependency, and consequence. The audience learns not because the image is pleasant, but because the shaped action becomes knowable.
So spectacle is powerful, yet subordinate to arrangement.
Subordinate, but not disposable. The scene aftermath seals what the reported action has prepared. Tragedy uses both, hidden event and public appearance, narration and body, learning and shock.
The arrangement gives spectators work to do. They hear an account, connect a prior act to a present consequence, revise an earlier judgment, and feel the action becoming legible. Aristotle's language names that work of relation. Sophocles supplies the oracle, household, city, and body through which relation becomes costly.
Here is the scene where I catch myself. Tiresias tells Oedipus that he himself is the pollution Thebes must drive out. My first response can be immediate and satisfying. Here is a powerful man who cannot bear criticism, so he turns furious. That response catches a real feature of the scene, and the scene asks us to follow the anger further.
The accusation lands in public, during a plague, from the prophet Oedipus called to help the city. Oedipus hears an attack on his office, his inquiry, and his standing before Thebes. He begins to imagine a conspiracy with Creon.
So anger arrives with a story already inside it. He believes a man he summoned to aid Thebes has humiliated him, blocked the inquiry, and turned the city's suffering back onto its ruler.
Rhetoric enters at exactly that point. Aristotle asks what the feeling appraises, in whom, before what audience, and toward what decision.
His definition of anger is sharp, a painful desire for apparent revenge because of apparent contempt. Status, intention, injury, and the wish to answer an affront are already inside the emotion.
The rhetoric studies this in public settings. Civic deliberation, judicial judgment, praise, and blame. Emotion belongs to the ways people decide what has happened, who has been injured, and what response seems due.
Return to Tiresias. His refusal to cooperate becomes, for Oedipus, evidence of contempt. His accusation becomes evidence of an attempt on the king's rule. The anger moves from appraisal into political action. It reorganizes suspicion, testimony, and public trust.
The definition therefore sharpens the scene without containing it. Oedipus is also trying to save a city, facing a prophet who knows too much, and carrying duty, fear, pride, and urgency into the encounter. Tragedy composes those pressures into an action with consequences beyond any one persuasive exchange.
Pity, fear, and shame will enter that action differently. Aristotle calls pity pain at an apparently destructive or painful bad thing happening to someone undeserving. He locates fear in a destructive evil appearing near, and shame in apparent disrepute before people whose opinion matters. Pity begins with the city. The people at the palace come as supplicants because plague, failed fertility, and public helplessness have made ordinary life impossible. Oedipus first attracts our admiration because he acts. Then, that active savior becomes terrifyingly vulnerable.
The messenger scene makes the turn felt. News from Corinth seems to release Oedipus. Polybus has died, and apparently not by his son's hand. For a moment, relief has room to breathe.
Then the messenger explains that Polybus was never Oedipus's natural father. The comfort opens the deeper danger. Fear becomes near because the evidence that seemed to protect him now asks where he came from, who gave him away, and what happened at the crossroads.
That is a different fear from something frightening might happen. It is the fear of learning that the story holding your life together has already begun to come apart.
Pity changes with it. The audience can still judge Oedipus's anger and coercion. It can also see a man brought toward knowledge by clues that arrive as help, relief, memory, and witness. The man who hunted pollution will become the pollution he hunted.
Shame gives that recognition a public body. Aristotle ties shame to disrepute before significant others. Oedipus's horror unfolds before city, kin, gods, household, and children. Exposure is part of the action's damage.
The chorus gives these feelings duration. It has prayed for relief, feared the prophet's words, remembered Oedipus's former glory, and must receive the reversal with Thebes. The chorus makes emotional change a civic experience.
That is where rhetoric and tragedy meet, then separate. Rhetoric studies how a speaker may dispose an audience toward judgment. Tragedy builds an action through which judgments and feelings change their shape in time.
Aristotle's compressed word catharsis keeps pity and fear tied to tragic action. The firm point for us is that the audience's feeling travels with recognition, reversal, agency, and consequence.
Pity and fear, therefore, arrive together at the scene of knowledge. The audience sees why the answer matters, feels the cost of its arrival, and has to live through what that answer does to a person and a city.
Which returns us to judgment. The play makes us ask what Oedipus did, what he knew, what he could not know, what he should be held to, and why his suffering still exceeds any clean sentence we can pass.
Aristotle's ethical and political works also keep speech, choice, pleasure, pain, and judgment close together. Public life does not begin after feeling is removed.
Public life begins when feeling becomes accountable to claims about harm, justice, desert, danger, and honor. The Rhetoric studies how human judgment takes shape under affective conditions.
The city's need for truth gives the drama its urgency. The dramatic action keeps that need open, difficult, and costly.
Oedipus gives civic inquiry a dramatic form. The city must seek truth, and the truth makes the work of saving the city necessary and unbearable at once.
The city must seek the truth, yet the truth damages the city's savior, household, and future.
That is why emotion in the play feels larger than reaction. It is evaluation under pressure. Fear is not, boo, scary prophecy. Pity is not, poor man. Shame is not embarrassment. Anger is not volume.
Each feeling asks what has happened, to whom, by whose action, with what knowledge, before which audience, and at what cost.
And tragedy refuses to let those questions settle into a portable answer too fast. It makes judgment feel necessary, then shows why judgment hurts.
Aristotle's emotions are relational. They register status, desert, harm, visibility, and comparison. Indignation, envy, and emulation each ask where people believe they stand in relation to honor and advantage.
That is why tragedy needs more than a persuasion manual. Rhetoric can dispose an audience toward a decision. Tragedy keeps several appraisals alive inside one action.
Oedipus makes that difference concrete. The city can pity the extremity of his fall and still judge the damage he has done. Shame exposes marriage, birth, household, and civic authority. Fear rises because the categories that seem to secure life have become unstable.
Tragedy suspends us inside those appraisals until recognition changes their meaning. That is the pressure we need before the witnesses begin to gather. The recognition in Oedipus is often treated like a twist ending, which is efficient and wrong. The answer arrives through people, places, memories, and unequal forms of speech.
Jocasta first tries to calm Oedipus by arguing that an oracle failed. Laius was killed, she says, by robbers at a place where three roads meet, not by his son.
Her intention is reassurance. Her effect is terror. The crossroads detail touches Oedipus's own memory of violence, and what was meant to dismiss prophecy becomes the next stage of inquiry.
Aristotle's reversal fits here. An action aimed in one direction turns toward the opposite through the structure of events.
It fits, but we should not let the term tidy the scene. Jocasta is not inserting a clue because the plot needs one. She is trying to protect her husband, her household, and maybe herself from the force of prophecy.
Oedipus then remembers the road encounter. His past, which seems separate from Thebes's plague, begins to join the public case.
He is no longer hunting only an unknown murderer. He is testing whether his own history belongs inside the city's suffering. The investigator's memory becomes evidence.
The Corinthian messenger arrives with news that appears liberating. Polybus is dead, and not by Oedipus's hand. The prophecy about killing his father seems broken.
The messenger intends comfort, but his speech reverses into catastrophe. To free Oedipus from fear of Polybus, he explains that Oedipus was not Polybus's natural son. He received the child from another shepherd, connected to Thebes and Cithaeron.
The help he offers becomes the thing that makes help impossible.
And that reversal has a human lag. The evidence that seemed to release Oedipus from parricide opens the deeper question of birth, exposure, and belonging. The comfort becomes a demand for the one witness who can complete the chain.
Jocasta hears the danger before Oedipus does. She urges him to stop asking. The shape of the evidence already tells her what its completion will disclose.
Oedipus reads her plea through another feeling. He thinks she fears the humiliation of his obscure birth, while the audience feels the space between what Jocasta now knows and what he still needs to know. The scene makes knowledge uneven before it makes it final.
That unevenness gives fear time. One person sees too much, another presses on, and the city has to wait while the last witness is brought forward.
The delay matters because it gives pity a new object, too. Oedipus is moving toward a truth he has publicly demanded, and the audience has begun to understand the cost before he does.
That witness is the Theban herdsman, and he resists. His reluctance matters because speech has consequences. He carries the connection between Laius's household, the exposed infant, and the adult king.
The herdsman is not just a clue dispenser. He is a person whose old act of handing over a child has become politically and bodily explosive. Oedipus has authority to compel him, but not authority to make the truth harmless.
Recognition is social then. It depends on unequal witnesses: queen, king, messenger, herdsman, prophet, chorus. Knowledge is collective, even as catastrophe concentrates on Oedipus.
That is the revision I want. The answer is not hidden in one object. It is distributed across palace, road, mountain, Corinth, Thebes, household memory, and enslaved memory.
Aristotle says the strongest recognitions arise from the events themselves. Here, the old murder, abandoned child, proclamation, reports, and forced testimony converge through the action.
And the convergence changes every relation. The king who vowed to cleanse the city is the source of pollution. The husband is the son. The son is the killer. The public protector becomes the figure who must be removed from public sight.
Oedipus names the dreadful completion. Oh, oh! All brought to pass, all true.
That sentence lands because the play has made truth both achievement and ruin. He wanted knowledge in order to save Thebes. He gets knowledge that destroys the identity from which he sought to save it.
It is too simple to call this a moral lesson about pride. His anger matters, but so do infant exposure, the Sphinx, household secrecy, prophecy, public office, and the witnesses he forces to speak.
Multiple accounts of agency remain open. Oedipus acts. Others acted before him. Gods speak through oracles. Servants preserve and conceal. Jocasta interprets. Creon brings news. The city demands relief.
The plot gathers those agencies into one action without making them morally identical.
This is where Aristotle's probability and necessity help again. Once the testimonies are gathered, recognition becomes the action's only possible consequence. But that does not mean anyone experiences it as a clean proof.
The proof has a body. Jocasta dies inside. Oedipus blinds himself with her brooches. The violence reaches the public through report, cries, doors, and visible aftermath.
Spectacle may be least intrinsic to the poet's art in Aristotle's ranking, but the play insists that knowledge appears through damaged bodies and civic exposure.
The body is not a supplement to the truth. It is where the truth leaves a mark.
And then the play still does not let us close the file. Creon assumes responsibility. Oedipus asks about exile and his daughters. The chorus remains with the cost of seeing.
The city that needed relief must now decide how to handle the savior as pollution. Civic survival and human pity do not neatly align.
This is why I resist the answer model. If the answer were merely, Oedipus did it, the play would be over at recognition. Instead, recognition opens aftermath.
The final movements are not extra suffering added after the puzzle. They show what knowledge requires the community to do.
The daughters matter because the past is not contained in Oedipus's self-punishment. His history continues as kinship damage, social exposure, and future vulnerability.
The chorus's final admonition, do not call any mortal happy until the end is seen, keeps human life under the pressure of change and outcome.
I want to be careful with that because it can become a fortune cookie ending. The admonition matters because we have watched mastery collapse. Oedipus's confidence, intelligence, and civic force made the inquiry possible.
The same qualities also carried him towards self-discovery.
Not because intelligence is bad. That is too easy. The tragedy is harsher. The city needs inquiry, and inquiry can expose the investigator as the problem.
The curse from the opening returns, but now it has passed through evidence. The words he spoke as ruler have become true of his own body and status.
That return is the shortest later recall we need. The public curse has become lived aftermath. We do not need to repeat the whole machinery. The audience remembers the trap because the action made it real.
Aristotle's vocabulary makes the formal pattern visible. Reversal, recognition, action, consequence.
And the rhetoric helps us see why emotions shift with each appraisal. Jocasta's reassurance becomes fear. Oedipus's anger becomes suspicion. Pity attaches to the city, then to the king, then to the ruined family.
Shame enters with public exposure. Fear enters with danger approaching through knowledge. Pity enters through suffering that exceeds simple blame.
But no vocabulary gets the last word. The tragedy keeps the pressure of the old man who does not want to speak. the queen who understands before the king, and the children who inherit consequences.
Then the philosophical terms are not replacements for the play. They are ways of staying with relations the play has already made active.
That is our shared revision. I started with impatience for the reveal. You started with solemn public suffering. The play forces both together. The answer matters, but only because the route to it reorganizes everyone's place.
The recognition is social evidence, bodily consequence, and civic aftermath.
Which is why twist is too small. A twist surprises an audience. This recognition reclassifies a life, a family, a city, and every earlier speech.
Even the messenger's comfort becomes part of the ruin.
And that is the nightmare version of interpretation. You say something to help, and the action turns your help into evidence.
Oedipus wanted an answer that would cleanse Thebes.
He receives an answer that makes cleansing inseparable from his removal. The city gets knowledge, but not innocence.
The form gives intelligibility without granting safety.
That might be the cleanest sentence we have, and therefore we should distrust it a little. The play gives intelligibility, but the bodies, prayers, children, and chorus make sure we do not enjoy the cleanliness too much.
Once recognition happens, I'm tempted to say order is restored. The answer is found, the hidden cause is named, and the city can move on.
Recognition changes more than one man's knowledge. The investigator, ruler, husband, son, and pollutant converge in one person. Authority, kinship, policeman, and memory change with him.
And the chorus receives that change with the city. It has prayed for relief, feared the prophet's words, remembered Oedipus's former glory, and now carries the answer as a crisis in collective judgment.
The aftermath therefore belongs to a civic world. Who may remain? Who must leave? What happens to the children? How is the polluted body handled? The city gains knowledge, and knowledge leaves a wound inside its own house of authority.
The chorus gives that wound duration. Its songs keep public feeling inside the action's knowledge, rather than allowing recognition to become a clean administrative result.
This brings me back to the remote, unfortunately. The recap version of Oedipus is easy. Plague, oracle, curse, prophet, crossroads, messenger, herdsman, recognition, blinding. It is not false. It is just too portable.
Aristotle became portable through a long history of reception. The Poetics survived as a short, difficult treatise whose terms moved through translation, commentary, schooling, academies, and literary debates.
I want to follow the practical history through which Aristotle's difficult terms become usable in new places.
Brazeau and Kennedy show translation, commentary, schooling, and debate as practices through which Aristotle became usable.
Usable is the dangerous and necessary word. A definition becomes a classroom tool. A classroom tool becomes a norm. A norm can harden into a rule. But a rule can also provoke invention.
Italian Renaissance readers encountered Aristotle in a field already shaped by Horace, rhetoric, Neoplatonism, religious justification, and debates about vernacular literary dignity.
They annotated, translated, argued, and made the Poetics teachable. They used Aristotelian language to debate Dante, Tasso, Ariosto, verisimilitude, decorum, genre, and the familiar package of the three unities.
The three unities were not simply sitting there as a finished ancient command. They were built through commentary and debate.
That is the part that matters for our remote problem. Portability is made. The handle is constructed by institutions, classrooms, translators, and arguments. Then, later readers may mistake the handle for the work.
Yet without handles, many conversations cannot begin. Terms like plot, recognition, reversal, probability, necessity, and spectacle give readers access to formal relations they might otherwise miss.
I will concede that summaries are not evil. I use them constantly, then pretend to be morally superior to them. The problem is when the summary replaces the duration of the action.
The rigid rulebook skips the historical process by which Aristotle became teachable, debatable, and useful. The recap skips the civic process by which Oedipus becomes knowable.
Both shortcuts can be necessary. Both can become evasions. We need portable language. But tragedy asks, what gets lost when portability arrives before attention?
Aristotle's Poetics can help us see arranged action. It cannot replace hearing Oedipus curse the unknown criminal, watching witnesses resist speech, or staying with the aftermath of recognition.
And reception history can help us see rules as made through use, not dropped from the sky. It cannot spare us from deciding how we use them now.
A rule can discipline a work, but it can also help a new work claim seriousness, challenge prestige, or enter a debate.
Think of the classroom version. Find the reversal can become a checklist with a highlighter. It can also send a reader back into the scene. What did Jocasta hope her story would do? What does the messenger think his news will do? And how does each speech change the force of the next? The term earns its keep only when it returns us to action.
Then a concept is a handle, but it remains attached to a door. It helps us enter a scene. It does not become the scene's substitute.
That keeps us from an easy anti-rule rebellion. Sometimes rebellion itself needs the canon's vocabulary so it can be heard.
The canon-rebel tension begins with durability. A work survives because people carry it, teach it, excerpt it, dispute it, and sometimes flatten it.
Flattening is not the whole story, but it is always nearby. A portable answer is useful because it travels. It is dangerous because it can stop asking what made travel necessary.
The open question, then, is not whether we should seek answers. Thebes has to seek one. Oedipus has to inquire. Readers need terms. Students need summaries.
The question is what the answer costs. Time, pity, civic confidence, the illusion that knowledge leaves the knower unchanged.
Or the illusion that a book beside a remote is enough to keep us honest.
That was almost affectionate, so I am going to correct it on principle. The book does not keep us honest. The open book only gives us the chance to notice when we are skipping.
And the remote only becomes a problem when efficiency pretends to be understanding.
Then we end where we started. The remote still there, the book still open, the city still waiting for relief.
And no answer that can be carried away without asking what made it heavy.
What do we lose when we make an answer portable before we have stayed with the action that gave it weight?
I am Bear. This is Critical Animal. If I got under your skin, good. Subscribe and bring me to your next dinner party. See you next time.